They say her name in a whisper, like a warning carried on the wind. Celeste, the beautiful house slave who moved with quiet grace, and left 7 plantation masters with their throats cut open in their own beds. Most folks think she was some kind of ghost. But Marshal Ephraim Tate, a freedman who tracks dark secrets for a living, knows better. He's seen the pattern, the candles left burning, the missing onyx ring, the silent steps that no overseer ever heard. As he follows her trail across the swamps, he uncovers a truth worse than any rumor. Those 7 men weren't victims. They were part of a hidden ring that used Celeste like a weapon, a possession, a body to be broken and traded. And now she's hunting the rest of them. Some call her a monster. Some call her a savior. But Ephraim knows one thing for sure. If he finds her first, he'll have to choose: save the woman the world fears, or stop the storm she's about to unleash. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The fog came first. It rolled across the fields like something alive, thick and gray, swallowing the dirt roads and slave quarters until nothing existed but wet white silence. Dawn hadn't properly broken yet, just a pale suggestion of light bleeding through the mist. The air smelled of swamp water and yesterday's rain. In the yard between the big house and the cotton sheds, enslaved workers gathered in small clusters. No one spoke above a whisper. Their heads stayed low, eyes fixed on the ground or on each other's faces, never on the upper windows where the white curtains hung still and heavy. Something was wrong. Everyone knew it before the overseer came storming out. Mr. Varner burst through the kitchen door like a man on fire, his face red and twisted with rage. He wore no jacket, just his shirt half tucked into his trousers, suspenders hanging loose at his sides. His boots thundered across the wooden porch. "Where is she?" he roared. The workers closest to the house took a step back. An older woman named Ruth clutched her apron with trembling fingers. A young man named Samuel stared at the ground so hard it seemed he might burn a hole through it with his eyes alone. "I said, where is she?" Varner's voice cracked on the last word. He descended the steps, 2 at a time, scanning the crowd with wild eyes. "Which one of you saw her last night? Which one of you knows where she went?" No one answered. Varner grabbed the nearest person, a teenage boy named Isaac, and shook him hard enough that his head snapped back. "You work in the stables. Did you see her leave? Did you see anything?" Isaac's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "Answer me, boy!" No, sir," Isaac finally stammered. "I didn't see nothing, sir. I swear it." Varner shoved him away so hard he fell into the mud. Then the overseer spun toward Ruth, jabbing a finger at her chest. You work in the house. When did you last see Celeste?" Ruth's voice came out thin and scared. "Last night, Mr. Varner. She served the master his supper. Around 8 o'clock, I think. Maybe a little after. And then what? I don't know, sir. I was in the kitchen cleaning. I didn't see where she went after that." Varner's jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. He looked back at the house, then at the workers, then at the house again. His hands opened and closed at his sides. "She killed him," he said, quieter now. The anger was still there, but something else had crept in beneath it, something that looked almost like fear. "She slit his throat while he slept, and now she's gone." A ripple went through the crowd. Not shock, most of them had already guessed, but hearing it said out loud made it real. Samuel finally looked up. "Is the master—" "Dead," Varner spat. "Murdered in his own bed, clean cut across the throat. No noise, no struggle. Just like—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Just like the others." Ruth's hand went to her mouth. Everyone knew about the others. 6 masters over the last 2 years, spread across 3 counties. All found the same way. Throats opened ear to ear, bodies still warm in their beds. No signs of violence anywhere else. No forced windows, no broken locks, no screaming in the night. Just death, silent and precise. And always afterward, a beautiful woman was missing, Celeste. Her name moved through the quarters like wind through leaves, whispered, feared, never quite believed, but impossible to forget. Some said she was a ghost, a spirit of vengeance that took the shape of a woman to lure men to their deaths. Others said she was cursed, that anyone who touched her would die before the week was out. Still others said she was real, flesh and blood, but taught by someone who knew secrets from across the ocean. Root work, magic, things that made white men's throats open like flowers. What everyone agreed on was this: Celeste was beautiful, not pretty, not handsome. Beautiful in a way that made men stupid. Jonah Sutter had been stupid. He'd purchased her 6 months ago from a traveling trader who dealt in what he called specialty acquisition. Jonah had seen her standing in the trader's wagon and immediately ordered his business manager to pay whatever price was asked. When she'd arrived at the plantation, Jonah had installed her in the big house, given her a room near the kitchen, and made it clear she was not to work the fields. She was for him, his private acquisition, his special servant. The enslaved workers had watched it happen with sick dread. They knew what special service meant. They'd seen other women cycled through Jonah's bedroom over the years, girls who came back to the quarters with haunted eyes and bodies that moved wrong. Some never came back at all, but Celeste had been different. She never spoke unless spoken to, never smiled, never cried. She moved through the house like a shadow, so quiet that people jumped when they realized she was in the room. Her face was perfectly smooth, unreadable, as if her thoughts happened somewhere far away where no one could touch them. And her beauty, God, her beauty made men lose their minds. Jonah had talked about her constantly. At dinner parties with neighboring planters, he'd boasted about her skin, her eyes, her figure. He'd called her his prize, his exotic jewel, his most valuable possession. Other white men had offered him money for a night with her. He'd refused them all with a proud grin. Now he was dead, and Celeste was gone. Varner paced back and forth in front of the workers, his boots squelching in the mud. "I want every building searched," he barked. "Every shed, every barn, every corner of this plantation. She can't have gone far. We'll find her before noon," and the sound of hoofbeats cut him off. Everyone turned toward the main road. Through the fog, a dark shape emerged. A man on horseback, riding at an easy pace. He wore a plain coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. As he drew closer, details sharpened. Dark skin, calm posture, saddlebags that looked well-traveled. Varner's face twisted. "Who the hell is that?" The rider stopped at the edge of the yard and dismounted with practiced ease. He tied his horse to the fence post, then turned to face the crowd. His expression was neutral, almost gentle, but his eyes moved over everything: the workers, the house, Varner's red face, with careful attention. "I'm looking for Mr. Varner," the man said. His voice was steady and educated, each word pronounced clearly. "You found him?" Varner crossed his arms. "Who are you, and what do you want?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. "My name is Ephraim Tate. I'm a marshal working with the Regional Freedmen's Office. I was sent to investigate reports of unusual deaths in this area." Varner stared at him like he'd just spoken in tongues. "A freedman marshal?" "Yes, sir." "Investigating what?" Ephraim's gaze didn't waver. "I believe you've had a death here this morning. A Mr. Jonah Sutter." Varner's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "How the hell do you know that? He's barely been dead 3 hours." Word travels, Ephraim said quietly. May I see the body? Inside the big house, the air was cooler but heavier. Ephraim followed Varner up the main staircase, ignoring the overseer's muttered complaints about uppity freedmen and meddling abolitionists. Behind them, two white farmhands trailed along with rifles, watching Ephraim like he might bolt at any moment. Jonah's bedroom door stood open. The room was large and well-furnished. Oak dresser, plush rug, four-poster bed with embroidered curtains. Jonah himself lay on his back in the center of the mattress, arms at his sides, eyes half open and glassy. A dark line crossed his throat from ear to ear. The cut was clean, surgical. Very little blood had spilled onto the sheets. Ephraim approached slowly, his eyes taking in every detail. The window, closed and latched from the inside. The door, no scratches on the lock. The nightstand, empty except for a half-finished glass of whiskey. Jonah's clothes were folded neatly on a chair. His boots sat side by side near the wardrobe. No struggle, Ephraim murmured. Varner snorted. She drugged him, most like. Put something in his food. Maybe. Ephraim knelt beside the bed, studying Jonah's hands. The fingers were relaxed, unstained. No defensive wounds, no broken nails. Then his gaze caught on something. He's missing a ring. His onyx signet, Varner confirmed bitterly. Never took the damn thing off. She must have stolen it on her way out. Ephraim said nothing. He stood and moved to the window, looking out over the foggy yard where workers still huddled in frightened groups. This is the 7th, he said quietly. Varner frowned. What? Ephraim turned to face him. 7 men, 7 plantations, all the same. Celeste serves them. They die. She disappears. He paused. You know what that means, don't you? Varner's face went pale. It means she's a demon. It means, Ephraim said, she's out there right now, and she's not finished. Ephraim sat at Jonah Sutter's desk, surrounded by the dead man's life. Papers covered every surface. Bills of sale, correspondence with neighboring planters, receipts for furniture and wine and imported fabrics. The room smelled of old tobacco and expensive cologne. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, cutting through the fog outside in pale yellow slices. Mr. Varner stood near the doorway with his arms crossed, watching Ephraim like a hawk watching a snake. You gonna be much longer? Varner asked. His voice was tight with irritation. I got a plantation to run, and we're already short-handed with half the workers scared out of their minds. Ephraim didn't look up. He was reading through a stack of letters, his fingers moving carefully across each page. Take your time, he said quietly. I'll let you know when I'm finished. Varner's jaw clenched, but he stayed where he was. The study was exactly what Ephraim expected from a man like Jonah Sutter. Expensive, tasteless, designed to impress visitors rather than to be lived in. Mahogany bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they'd never been opened. A globe sat in the corner, gathering dust. Hunting trophies hung above the fireplace. A deer head, a boar's skull, the pelt of something Ephraim didn't recognize. Everything in this room screamed power, ownership, control. And now its owner was dead. Ephraim set down the letters and turned his attention to the bedroom again. He'd already examined Jonah's corpse, but the room itself deserved another look. He walked back through the connecting door, ignoring Varner's irritated sigh. The bed still held Jonah's body. The farmhands hadn't moved it yet. Ephraim didn't look at the corpse this time. Instead, he studied the nightstand. The whiskey glass sat exactly where it had been before, half empty, amber liquid catching the light. But beside it, almost hidden behind a candlestick, was a second glass. Ephraim picked it up carefully. The crystal was fine, expensive. He held it up to the window, tilting it until the light revealed a faint residue at the bottom. He touched his finger to it, then brought it to his nose. Wine. Red wine, judging by the smell. He set the glass down and looked at the candles, 3 of them on the nightstand, burned down to nubs. They'd been lit for hours, long enough to melt halfway through their stems. Jonah hadn't been surprised last night. He'd been expecting someone. Ephraim moved to the door and examined the lock. No scratches, no damage. It had been opened from the inside willingly by someone who had the key or by someone Jonah trusted enough to let in. He turned back to Varner. Did Celeste have access to this room? Varner shifted his weight. She worked in the house. She had access to most rooms. Did she serve Jonah his meals here? Sometimes. Varner's voice was clipped. When he wanted privacy. Ephraim nodded slowly. He walked to the wardrobe and opened it, scanning the clothes inside. Fine coats, pressed shirts, polished boots. Nothing unusual. He checked the dresser next. Handkerchiefs, cufflinks, a silver pocket watch. Then he knelt and looked under the bed. Dust. A forgotten shoe. Nothing else. He stood and brushed off his knees. I need to speak with the workers. Varner's eyes narrowed. What for? Because they saw Celeste every day. They know things you don't. They're slaves, Varner said flatly. They don't know anything worth hearing. Ephraim met his gaze without blinking. Then you won't mind if I waste my time talking to them? The kitchen was warm and smelled of biscuits. 2 women worked near the stove, one older, gray-haired and heavy-set, the other younger with careful hands and watchful eyes. They both stiffened when Ephraim entered, glancing toward Varner, who'd followed him like a shadow. I need to ask you some questions, Ephraim said gently. About Celeste. The older woman, Ruth, he'd learned her name earlier, wiped her hands on her apron. Her face was unreadable. What do you want to know? She asked. What was she like? Ruth hesitated. Beside her, the younger woman, Sarah, kept her eyes on the floor. She was quiet, Ruth said finally. Didn't talk much. Kept to herself. Did she seem frightened? No, sir. Ruth's voice was steady. She wasn't frightened. She was calm. Too calm, if you ask me. Like nothing could touch her. Ephraim tilted his head. Did she ever talk about the master? Ruth's mouth tightened. No, sir. Did she talk to you at all? A pause. Sarah's hands stilled on the dough she was kneading. Once, Sarah said quietly. She still didn't look up. She told me something once. Ephraim waited. Sarah swallowed. She said, Don't let them break the part of you they can't see. Her voice wavered. That's all she said. I didn't know what she meant. Ephraim felt something cold settle in his chest. When did she tell you that? A few weeks ago. After... Sarah trailed off, her cheeks darkening. Ruth put a hand on the girl's shoulder. After the master called her upstairs, she finished quietly. Sarah brought him tea that night. She saw Celeste leaving his room. Ephraim's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. Did Celeste ever seem angry? Vengeful? No, sir, Ruth said. She didn't seem anything. It was like she was somewhere else all the time. Like her body was here, but her mind was 1,000 miles away. Ephraim nodded slowly. He thanked them both and left the kitchen. Varner still trailing behind him like a suspicious dog. Back in the study, Ephraim returned to Jonah's desk. He'd seen something earlier, a false bottom in one of the drawers, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. He pulled the drawer out completely and set it on the floor. Sure enough, a thin panel of wood covered the space beneath. He pried it up with his fingers. Inside was a small iron box. Varner stepped closer. What's that? Ephraim didn't answer. He lifted the box out and set it on the desk. It wasn't locked. He opened it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound ledger. Ephraim's heart began to beat faster. He opened the ledger and scanned the first page. Names, dates, prices, transactions, all for enslaved women. But these weren't ordinary purchases. The notes beside each name made that clear. Excellent breeding potential. Requires additional conditioning. Responsive to discipline. Suitable for specialty clients. Ephraim turned the page. More names, more transactions, and beside each one, a buyer's name. 7 of those names had been crossed out in black ink. His eyes moved down the list, recognizing them one by one. Masters from plantations across 3 counties, all dead within the last 2 years, all killed the same way. He kept reading. 23 more names remained uncrossed. Buyers who were still alive, still active. This wasn't random. This was a network. A trafficking ring that bought and sold women for a single, horrifying purpose. Ephraim's hands trembled as he turned another page. There, near the top, he found her. Celeste. Purchased 1856. Transferred between clients. 1856, 1858. Current placement. Sutter. Beneath her name was a note in Jonah's handwriting. Exceptional training. Highly profitable. Ephraim closed the ledger slowly. He looked at Varner, whose face had gone pale. You knew, Ephraim said quietly. I didn't. You knew what he was doing. Varner stepped back. I managed the fields. What he did in his house wasn't my business. Ephraim stood, tucking the ledger under his arm. It's my business now. By noon, Ephraim was ready to leave. He'd packed the ledger into his saddlebag, along with copies of Jonah's correspondence. Varner watched him from the porch, arms still crossed, face still tight with barely concealed anger. Ephraim was tightening the straps on his saddle when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. A young boy stood there, maybe 14, thin and nervous, wearing stable clothes, his hands twisted together in front of him. Sir, the boy whispered. Ephraim knelt to meet his eyes. What is it? The boy glanced over his shoulder, checking to make sure no one was watching. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A ring, black onyx, set in gold. Jonah's signet. Ephraim's breath caught. He took the ring carefully. Where did you find this? Outside her quarters, the boy whispered. This morning. In the dirt. Ephraim turned the ring over in his palm. The surface was cool, smooth, deliberately placed. She wants me to know she was here, he murmured. The boy nodded quickly, then turned and ran back toward the stables before anyone could see him. Ephraim pocketed the ring and mounted his horse. He looked back at the plantation one last time, at the big house, at the fields, at the workers still moving through their routines with haunted eyes. Then he turned his horse toward the road and rode toward the next plantation where Celeste had once lived. The sun hung low and red over the Dawson plantation when Ephraim arrived. The air felt different here, colder somehow, despite the Louisiana heat. The fields stretched out in perfect rows, the work synchronized like clockwork. No one spoke. No one looked up from their labor. Everything was controlled. The overseer met him at the gate, a lean man with suspicious eyes. Marshal Tate? That's right. Mr. Dawson's expecting you. Follow me. They walked toward the main house in silence. Ephraim noticed the workers glancing at him from the corners of their eyes, their movements careful and measured. Even the children seemed afraid to play too loudly. This place was different from Sutter's plantation. There, fear had been personal, directed at one man's cruelty. Here, fear was systemic, built into every breath. Augustus Dawson waited in his parlor, a thin man with graying hair and trembling hands. He stood when Ephraim entered, offering a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marshal Tate, thank you for coming. His voice was higher than Ephraim expected, nervous. Terrible business. What happened to Jonah? Simply terrible. Ephraim sat without being invited. You knew him well? We were acquaintances, business associates, you might say. Dawson poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. His hands shook slightly, clinking the glass against the bottle. Bourbon? No, thank you. Dawson drank quickly, then refilled his glass. I assume you're here about the woman, Celeste. She lived here before Sutter bought her. Yes, briefly. Dawson sat down, crossing and uncrossing his legs. 2 years ago, I believe. Maybe 3. I don't recall exactly. You don't recall when you sold a woman? I sell many. Dawson stopped himself, cleared his throat. I manage many transactions. It's difficult to remember every detail. Ephraim leaned forward. I found a ledger at Sutter's plantation. Your name was in it. Dawson's face went pale. The glass in his hand trembled. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Dawson stood abruptly, walking to the window. He stared out at the fields, his back to Ephraim. I run a respectable operation here, Marshal. I follow the law. I keep proper records. Whatever Jonah was involved in had nothing to do with me. Then you won't mind answering questions about Celeste? I've already told you. I don't remember her specifically. Ephraim stood slowly. That's strange, because the workers remember her. They remember her very well. Dawson turned sharply. You haven't. You can't just— I can, Ephraim said quietly. Unless you'd like to tell me why you're so frightened. I'm not frightened. You're terrified. Ephraim moved closer. But not of me. Not of Celeste. Of someone else. Dawson's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man drowning. I don't know anything, he whispered finally, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Some things are bigger than one man's life. Ephraim watched him for a long moment. Then he walked to the door. I'll speak with your workers. You're welcome to listen if you'd like. Dawson didn't follow. The quarters were quieter than Sutter's. People moved through their evening routines with practiced efficiency. Eyes down, voices low. Ephraim approached an older woman sitting outside her cabin, mending a shirt by lamplight. Ma'am? She looked up. Her face was lined with age and exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp. You the marshal? Yes, ma'am. Ephraim Tate. She nodded slowly. What do you want to know? About Celeste. The woman's hands stilled on the fabric. She ain't here no more. I know. I want to know what she was like when she was. The woman glanced around, checking who might be listening. Then she set down her mending and gestured for him to sit. He sat on the ground beside her stool. She came here young, the woman said quietly. Maybe 15, 16. Pretty thing. Too pretty. The kind of pretty that gets you noticed, gets you hurt. What happened to her? Same thing that happens to all the pretty ones. They showed her off, brought buyers through, made her stand there while men looked at her like she was livestock. The woman's voice was flat, emotionless. She learned quick that fighting don't help. So she stopped fighting. How did she survive? By becoming what they wanted. Or at least looking like she was. The woman picked up her mending again, her fingers moving mechanically. But she was learning too. Watching. Listening. She moved quiet. Quieter than anyone I ever seen. Could walk through a room and you wouldn't hear nothing. Could read a man's face and know what he wanted before he said it. Ephraim's chest tightened. They trained her. They broke her, the woman corrected. Or tried to. I don't think they succeeded. An older man approached from the next cabin, leaning on a cane. You asking about Celeste? Yes, sir. The man sat down heavily on a log. She was smart. Smarter than they knew. Used to watch her sometimes. When she didn't know I was looking, she'd be staring at nothing. But you could see her mind working, planning something. Did she ever talk about leaving? No. She didn't talk much at all. The man paused. But she met someone once. In the woods? Ephraim's attention sharpened. Who? Don't know. Never got close enough to see. But I saw her walking that way one night, real careful-like. Came back an hour later with food she didn't have before. Fresh fish. Wild berries. The woman nodded. I saw something too. Boot prints near the tree line. Big ones. Mismatched. One boot newer than the other. A protector, Ephraim said quietly. Maybe. The woman's eyes met his. Or maybe someone teaching her how to survive out there. How to disappear. Ephraim stayed through the night, speaking with anyone willing to talk. The stories came in fragments, pieces of a puzzle that slowly formed a picture. Celeste, displayed at auctions like property. Celeste, punished when she showed defiance. Celeste, learning to read men's weaknesses, their fears, their desires. Celeste, transforming herself into a weapon using the only tools they'd given her. Near midnight, Ephraim asked if he could sleep in the quarters, rather than return to the main house. The workers exchanged glances, surprised, then nodded. They gave him a blanket and a corner of a cabin. He lay awake most of the night, listening to the sounds of people breathing, shifting, whispering prayers in the darkness. Before dawn, Ephraim walked to the edge of the woods, where the man had mentioned seeing boot prints. The sky was still dark, stars fading into gray. He moved slowly through the trees, scanning the ground. Nothing at first. Then he saw it. A mark on a cypress tree. Pale chalk, almost invisible in the dim light. He moved closer, crouching to examine it. 3 lines crossing diagonally. A circle beneath them. Symbols he'd seen before, years ago, when he'd worked with Maroon Scouts further south. Safe path. He stood and looked deeper into the woods. Another tree, 20 feet away. Another marking. Protected woman. Ephraim's heart beat faster. He touched the chalk, felt its texture, recent, within the last few days. Celeste wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. The Maroons were helping her. He straightened and walked back toward the plantation, his mind racing. By the time he reached the stables, the sun was rising, painting the sky orange and gold. He saddled his horse quickly, ignoring Dawson's overseer who watched from the porch. He mounted and turned the animal toward the road, not toward the next plantation, toward the bayou. The swamp swallowed sound. Ephraim's horse moved slowly through water that reached its knees, each step deliberate and careful. Moss hung from cypress branches like curtains, blocking the sunlight. The air was thick enough to choke on, humid and heavy with the smell of rotting vegetation. Mosquitoes swarmed his face. He swatted them away, but more came immediately. His shirt stuck to his back with sweat. He'd left the horse tied to a tree an hour ago when the water became too deep. Now he walked, boots sinking into mud with every step. Roots twisted beneath the surface, trying to trip him. Twice he stumbled, catching himself on rough bark that scraped his palms. The chalk markings continued, faint but visible if you knew where to look. A line on a stone, a circle on a fallen log, arrows pointing deeper into the swamp. Ephraim followed them, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. He knew he was being watched. The feeling had started 20 minutes ago, a prickling at the back of his neck, a sense of eyes tracking his movements. He'd stopped twice, listening, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No sound but water dripping and insects buzzing. But the feeling didn't leave. Someone was out there, following, waiting. He kept walking. The chapel appeared suddenly, rising from the swamp like a skeleton. Spanish architecture, crumbling and ancient. Vines covered most of the walls, pulling stones loose. The roof had collapsed in several places, leaving gaping holes where sunlight poured through. Ephraim stopped at the entrance, water lapping at the broken doorway. He looked up at the structure, noting the way the walls leaned inward, unstable and dangerous. "You came." The voice was quiet, calm. Coming from inside the chapel, Ephraim stepped through the doorway, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. Water covered the floor, shallow and still. Broken pews jutted from the surface like gravestones. She stood at the far end, near what had once been an altar. Celeste. Ephraim's breath caught despite himself. The rumors hadn't exaggerated her beauty. She had symmetrical features, high cheekbones, full lips, large eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Her skin was smooth, her posture perfect despite standing in ankle-deep water. But it wasn't the kind of beauty that invited warmth. It was cold, precise, like something carved from marble rather than born from flesh. Her expression was distant, unreadable, the look of someone who had learned to hide everything important behind a mask. She wore a simple dress, torn at the hem and stained with mud. Her hair was pulled back tightly. No jewelry, no adornment. She didn't move as he approached. "You're Marshall Tate," she said. Not a question. "I am. You've been following me for 3 days." "Yes." "Why?" Ephraim stopped a few feet away from her. "To understand." "Understand what?" "Why 7 men are dead." Something flickered in her eyes. So brief he almost missed it. Anger, maybe. Or grief. "You already know why," she said quietly. "You found the ledger." "I did." "Then you know what they did." Ephraim nodded slowly. "Tell me anyway." Celeste tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then she moved to one of the broken pews and sat down carefully, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like a woman sitting in church, waiting for a sermon. "I was 16 when they bought me," she said. Her voice was measured, each word deliberate. "A man named Cromer purchased me at auction in Charleston. He told the auctioneer he wanted someone young, someone with good features, someone who could produce valuable children." Ephraim felt his stomach turn. "He took me to a plantation in Georgia. There were other women there, 12 of us. We were kept in separate cabins, catalogued by name and physical description. They measured us, weighed us, examined our teeth like horses." She paused, her expression never changing. "They called it a breeding program. They wanted to see which pairings produced the best offspring. Strong children, beautiful children, children they could sell for higher prices." Ephraim's hands clenched into fists. "They moved us between plantations," Celeste continued. "Different men, different masters, each one recorded in a ledger with notes about temperament, fertility, obedience. We weren't people. We were experiments." "Did you—" Ephraim's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Did you have children?" For the first time her mask slipped. Pain crossed her face, raw and devastating. "One," she whispered. "A daughter. They took her from me when she was 3 days old. I never saw her again." Silence filled the chapel. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. "I'm sorry," Ephraim said. Celeste's expression hardened again, the mask sliding back into place. "Sorry doesn't bring her back." "No, it doesn't." She stood slowly, moving to the window. She looked out at the swamp, her silhouette dark against the light. "I killed them because they deserved to die," she said simply. "Each of the 7 men participated in the program. Each one bought me, used me, catalogued me. Each one treated me like property. The rumors say you seduced them." A bitter smile touched her lips. "The rumors are half true. I did seduce them, but not the way they think." "What do you mean?" "They trained me to be seductive," she said quietly. "Taught me how to read men's desires, how to move, how to speak. They punished me when I failed, beat me when I resisted. I learned quickly that survival meant becoming what they wanted." She turned to face him. "So I became perfect at it. I learned their weaknesses, their fears, their secrets. I learned how to make them trust me, how to make them invite me into their rooms, pour me wine, send away their guards." Her eyes were cold now, empty. "And then I killed them." Ephraim stared at her. "You're not a monster." "Aren't I?" "You're a survivor. Is there a difference?" Before Ephraim could respond, something rustled outside, branches breaking, footsteps splashing through water. Celeste's entire body went rigid, her eyes locked on the doorway. "They found us," she whispered. "Who?" "Bounty hunters." Her voice was urgent now, low. "Dawson must have sent word." Ephraim reached for his knife, but Celeste grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "If you want to live, don't speak. Follow me." She moved quickly, silently, pulling him toward the back of the chapel. Her feet made no sound on the water. She reached the altar and pressed against a stone that looked identical to all the others. Something clicked. A section of the floor shifted, revealing a dark opening beneath. A tunnel. Voices echoed outside now. Men calling to each other, getting closer. Celeste looked at Ephraim, her expression urgent but calm. "Now," she whispered. She dropped into the tunnel and disappeared into darkness. Ephraim hesitated for only a second. Then he followed. The tunnel had been longer than Ephraim expected. They crawled through darkness for what felt like hours, mud soaking through their clothes, the ceiling so low it scraped against Ephraim's back. Celeste moved ahead of him, silent as a ghost, navigating turns he couldn't see. When they finally emerged, it was behind the chapel, in a section of swamp so thick with brush that the entrance was completely hidden. Vines hung like curtains. Thick palmetto fronds blocked the view in every direction. Celeste pressed a finger to her lips and pointed to a tangle of roots. They crouched behind it, their breathing shallow and controlled. Voices echoed from the chapel, men shouting orders, boots splashing through water. "Check the back. She couldn't have gone far. Spread out!" Ephraim's muscles tensed. He counted 4 distinct voices, maybe 5. All men, all armed, judging by the metallic clinks he heard when they moved. Celeste remained perfectly still beside him. She didn't flinch when a hunter passed within 10 feet of their hiding spot. Her eyes tracked his movement with the focus of a predator watching prey. The man wore dirty clothes and carried a rifle. He scanned the brush, squinting into the shadows, then moved on. Minutes crawled by like hours. The hunters searched the area methodically, checking behind trees, prodding the water with sticks, calling out to each other when they found nothing. Ephraim's legs began to cramp from crouching. Sweat dripped down his face. Mosquitoes bit his neck and arms, but he didn't move to swat them. Celeste's breathing never changed. In, out, slow and steady. After what felt like an eternity, the voices began to fade. The hunters moved back toward the chapel, frustration clear in their cursing. "Probably already miles from here. Dawson ain't gonna pay us nothing if we come back empty-handed. Then we keep looking." Their voices grew distant, then silent. Celeste waited another 10 minutes before she finally moved. She straightened slowly, scanning the area with eyes that missed nothing. Then she nodded once. "They're gone," she whispered. Ephraim stood, his legs protesting. He stretched carefully, keeping his movements quiet despite the pain. "You could have fled," he said, his voice low. "When you first saw me coming, you could have disappeared into the swamp." Celeste looked at him, her expression unreadable again. "I could have. Why didn't you?" "Because you have something I need. The ledger." "Yes." Ephraim studied her carefully. "You want the names?" "All of them." She turned to face him fully. 23 men are still alive. 23 men who participated in that program, who bought women, who stole children, who treated human beings like livestock. And you want them dead. I want justice. Justice or vengeance? Her eyes hardened. Is there a difference? Ephraim felt the weight of the question settle between them. He thought of the ledger hidden in his saddlebag. Names, locations, detailed records of transactions that turned his stomach. He thought of the women those men had bought and broken. But he also thought of the 7 corpses, 7 throats cut, 7 murders, no matter how deserved. "I understand your anger," he said carefully. "I understand your pain. But killing them won't bring your daughter back. It won't undo what they did." "No," Celeste agreed quietly, "but it will stop them from doing it again. The law. The law." Her voice cut like glass. "The law allows men to own people. The law protects masters who rape their slaves. The law would hang me for defending myself, while those men walk free." She stepped closer to him. "Don't talk to me about the law, Marshal. The law created this nightmare long before I picked up a knife." Ephraim opened his mouth, then closed it. She was right. He knew she was right. "You think I'm losing myself," Celeste said, reading his expression with unnerving accuracy. You think vengeance is turning me into a monster. I think, Ephraim struggled to find the word. I think you've survived things that would destroy most people. I think you deserve freedom, peace, a life that's yours. I can't have peace while they're still breathing. And after? When all 23 are dead? What then? Celeste's face remained calm, but something flickered behind her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. Or emptiness. I don't know, she admitted. But at least I'll have done something. At least those women's deaths will mean something. They stood in silence, water lapping at their ankles, the swamp breathing around them. Finally, Ephraim exhaled slowly. If I give you the ledger, you'll keep hunting them. Yes. And if I don't? I'll find another way. She paused. But it will take longer, and more women might suffer while I search. Ephraim closed his eyes. The moral weight of the choice crushed against his chest. Help a killer, or let a system continue unchecked. Enable violence, or protect victims. There was no clean answer. There never was. I'll work with you, he said finally, but on one condition. What? We do this carefully, methodically. No innocent people get hurt. Celeste's expression didn't change. I've never killed an innocent person. And we plan each step. No rushing in blind. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Agreed. The tension between them didn't disappear, but it shifted slightly. An uneasy alliance born from necessity rather than trust. Come, Celeste said, turning toward deeper brush. We need to move before they send more hunters. She led him through paths that shouldn't have existed, narrow trails between thorns, stepping stones hidden beneath water, routes that seemed to appear and vanish depending on the angle of approach. Ephraim followed, struggling to keep up with her silent grace. They walked for hours. The sun climbed higher, burning through the canopy in scattered patches. Ephraim's clothes dried slowly, leaving salt stains and the smell of swamp water. At midday, the landscape shifted. The water became shallower. Solid ground appeared in larger patches, and ahead, barely visible through the trees, smoke rose from several small fires. A camp. Celeste paused at the edge of the clearing, making a soft bird call. 2 notes, rising and falling. Silence. Then the call was returned from somewhere deeper in the camp. They entered, carefully. Ephraim saw rough shelters built between trees, structures that could be dismantled and moved quickly. Cooking fires burned low. People moved between the shelters with quiet efficiency. Maroons, escaped slaves who'd built communities in places white men feared to enter. A man approached them, tall, lean, with scars crossing his forearms, and a face that revealed nothing. He wore mismatched boots, one brown and one black. The boots from the chalk markings. Baku, Celeste said quietly. The man nodded once, his eyes moving to Ephraim with careful assessment. He studied him for a long moment, then looked back at Celeste. She made a small gesture with her hand, some signal Ephraim didn't understand. Baku's expression softened slightly. He nodded again, this time including Ephraim in the gesture. Acknowledgement. Acceptance. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. Ephraim was allowed here. For now. Celeste led him to one of the shelters where they could sit. Baku disappeared into the camp, returning minutes later with water and dried meat. He set them down without speaking, then moved away to give them space. Ephraim drank deeply, the water cool and clean despite coming from the swamp. He hadn't realized how thirsty he was. Baku's been helping you, he said quietly. Celeste nodded. Him and others. They provided safe routes, warnings when hunters came close, shelter when I needed it. Why? Because they understand what it means to fight for freedom. She paused. And because some of them lost daughters to the same program. Ephraim felt the weight of that settle over him. They spent the afternoon planning. Ephraim produced the ledger, and together they studied the remaining names. Celeste pointed to one entry near the top. Silas Cromer, she said, her voice flat. He runs a plantation 30 miles south. He was one of the program's founders. What did he do? Everything. Her jaw tightened. He designed the breeding schedules, decided which women would be paired with which men, punished anyone who resisted. She paused. And he personally handled the children, sold them, shipped them away. Your daughter? Yes. Ephraim looked at the entry. Cromer's plantation was large, well defended. Getting in would be difficult. Getting out alive would be nearly impossible. We'll need a plan, he said. I know. Celeste studied the map he'd drawn from memory. I've been watching his plantation for 2 weeks. I know the guard rotations, the weak points, the times when he's most vulnerable. When? 3 nights from now. There's a gathering. Other members of the ring visit to discuss business. Cromer will have guests. That makes it more dangerous. It also means more targets in one place. Ephraim looked at her sharply. We agreed, carefully and methodically. This is both, but we need to move soon, before they increase security. He studied the map again, tracing potential routes with his finger. His mind worked through possibilities, obstacles, risks. Finally, he nodded slowly. 3 nights, but we do this my way. Minimal casualties. In and out clean. Agreed. Night fell over the camp. Fires burned low, providing just enough light to see by. Baku and the other Maroons settled into their shelters, leaving Celeste and Ephraim beside a small fire near the edge of the clearing. Ephraim spread Cromer's plantation map between them, studying the layout by firelight. Guard positions, building locations, escape routes. Celeste sat across from him, her face illuminated by flickering flames. She stared into the fire with an expression that was almost peaceful, except for her eyes, which held nothing but cold determination. He sold my child, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the crackling wood. I will not leave him breathing. The firelight danced across her face, casting shadows that made her look both beautiful and terrible. The darkness before dawn was absolute. Celeste crouched in the underbrush, her body perfectly still, barely breathing. Beside her, Ephraim shifted his weight carefully, trying to match her stillness, but unable to completely suppress the small sounds of a man unused to hunting. They were 50 yards from Cromer's plantation. The big house loomed ahead, a pale shape against the slightly lighter sky. Guard lanterns moved in slow arcs across the grounds, predictable patterns Celeste had memorized over 2 weeks of watching. Baku had disappeared into the shadows 15 minutes earlier, moving ahead to scout the perimeter. He made no sound. One moment he was beside them, the next he was simply gone, absorbed by the darkness as if he'd never existed. Ephraim's breath came too loud in the silence. Celeste could hear his heartbeat, or maybe it was her own. The familiar coldness settled over her. The numbness she'd learned to wear like armor whenever she needed to become something other than human. A bird call came from somewhere ahead. 2 notes, rising and falling. Baku's signal. The path was clear. Celeste moved forward without waiting for Ephraim to acknowledge the sound. She knew he would follow. Her feet found solid ground instinctively, avoiding twigs that might snap and mud that might squelch. Years of forced training had taught her to move like a ghost. They reached the fence line, heavy wooden posts connected by iron chains, designed more to mark boundaries than to keep people out. Ephraim knelt beside one of the posts, examining the connection points. He pulled a small pry bar from his belt, a tool he'd acquired from the Maroon camp, and worked it into the gap where chain met wood. The metal groaned softly. Ephraim froze, listening. No shouts, no running feet. The guard lanterns continued their lazy patrol. He applied pressure again, more carefully this time. The chain loosened, pulling free from its mounting. He lowered it gently to the ground, then moved to the next post. Within minutes, he'd created an opening large enough to slip through. Celeste went first. She moved through the gap like water, her body bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Ephraim followed more clumsily, his broader frame catching briefly on the rough wood. They were inside the plantation grounds now, exposed, vulnerable. Ahead, two guards patrolled near the servants' quarters. Their lanterns swung back and forth, illuminating patches of ground. They spoke in low voices, bored and tired from a long night's watch. Ephraim picked up a stone from the ground. He weighed it in his palm, judging the distance. Then he threw it hard into the brush 30 yards to their left. The stone crashed through leaves and branches, making far more noise than seemed possible from such a small object. Both guards stopped. Their lanterns swung toward the sound. "What was that?" one of them said. "Probably a possum. Or a raccoon. Could be a runaway." They moved toward the noise, leaving their patrol route unguarded. Celeste and Ephraim slipped past the servants' quarters while the guards investigated the empty brush. The big house stood ahead now, its white columns gleaming faintly in the pre-dawn light. Most windows were dark, but one on the second floor showed the flicker of candlelight. Cromer's bedroom? Celeste had watched him wake at this same hour every morning for the past 2 weeks. He was a creature of rigid habit. She led Ephraim to the back entrance, a servant's door that was never properly locked, because the maids needed to enter before sunrise to start cooking. She tested the handle slowly. It turned. They slipped inside. The interior smelled of tobacco smoke and expensive perfume. Thick carpets absorbed their footsteps. Celeste moved through the halls with perfect confidence, navigating from memory. She'd served in this house once, years ago, when she'd first been purchased by the ring. She remembered everything. They climbed the back stairs, each step carefully placed to avoid creaking wood. The candle flickered under Cromer's door, casting light through the gap at the bottom. Celeste paused outside, listening. She heard him moving inside. The soft sound of clothing being pulled on, the splash of water in a basin. He was awake and preparing for the day. She looked at Ephraim. He nodded once. She opened the door. Silas Cromer stood before a mirror, buttoning his shirt. He was a thin man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked dignified in public, but cruel in private. When he saw Celeste's reflection behind him, he didn't seem surprised. "Well," he said calmly, turning to face her, "I wondered when you'd get to me." Celeste said nothing. She closed the door behind Ephraim, who positioned himself in front of it, blocking any escape. Cromer smiled. It was a cold expression, devoid of warmth. "You've caused quite a stir, my dear. 7 good men dead. The whole network is frightened of you now." "Good," Celeste said quietly. "They're offering a substantial reward for your capture. Alive, preferably. They want to make an example of you." He studied her face with clinical interest. "You were always so beautiful. Such a shame you turned out to be defective." Celeste's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Do you remember me?" Cromer asked. "I selected you personally at the auction, paid top dollar. You had such potential. I remember. I trained you myself, taught you how to be useful, valuable." He paused. "I gave you purpose. You destroyed me. I created you," Cromer corrected. "Everything you are, everything you've become, that's my work. You should be thanking me." Ephraim watched from the door, his jaw tight. He wanted to intervene, to stop this conversation, but he understood that Celeste needed this moment. "My daughter," Celeste said. Her voice remained steady, but her hands had begun to shake. "Where did you send her? Your daughter?" Cromer laughed. "Do you have any idea how many children passed through this program? Dozens. Hundreds. They all went to good homes, wealthy families who could afford quality merchandise. Where? I don't remember specific transactions. They weren't important enough to commit to memory." He adjusted his collar, entirely unconcerned with the danger he was in. "She's probably working in some plantation kitchen by now. Or maybe she died. The young ones don't always survive the journey." Something broke in Celeste's expression. The careful mask she wore cracked, just for a moment. revealing the raw wound beneath. Cromer saw it and smiled wider. "Does that hurt? Good. You were supposed to be emotionally detached. That was the whole point of the conditioning. The fact that you still care proves you were a failed experiment." Celeste pulled the knife from her belt. The same blade she'd used on 7 other men. It caught the candlelight, gleaming. Cromer's smile didn't fade. "Go ahead. Kill me. It won't bring her back. It won't undo what I did. And the program will continue without me. You're just one angry woman with a knife. We're a system." "Then I'll dismantle the system," Celeste said. One throat at a time. She moved faster than Ephraim could follow. One moment, she was standing still. The next, she was across the room, her blade pressed against Cromer's neck. He didn't have time to cry out, didn't have time to defend himself. The cut was precise, clinical, exactly like the others. Cromer collapsed, his hands clutching uselessly at his throat. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. His eyes went wide with shock and fear, the first genuine emotion Ephraim had seen in them. Celeste stood over him, watching him die. Her face remained calm, but her entire body had begun to shake. Cromer's movements slowed. His breathing turned to wet gasps. Then silence. He was dead. For a long moment, Celeste didn't move. Then her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees beside the corpse, the knife falling from her hand. Her shoulders began to shake violently, and a sound escaped her throat. Not crying exactly, but something more broken. A sound that came from somewhere deep and damaged. Ephraim crossed the room quickly and knelt beside her. He didn't touch her. He knew better than to assume physical contact would be welcome, but he stayed close, present. "He sold her," Celeste whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "He sold my baby, and he doesn't even remember. I know. She could be anywhere. She could be dead. I'll never—" Her voice broke completely. "I know," Ephraim said again, his own throat tight. Outside, a bell began to ring. Someone had discovered the disabled fence or the missing guards. Shouts echoed across the plantation grounds. "We need to go," Ephraim said gently. Celeste nodded, but she couldn't seem to make her body move. The emotional collapse was complete. Years of carefully maintained control had finally shattered. Ephraim helped her stand, supporting her weight as she found her balance. He retrieved her knife, wiped it clean on Cromer's shirt, and pressed it back into her hand. "Can you walk?" She nodded again, this time managing to take a step. They left through the same servant's door, moving quickly now. Behind them, smoke began to rise from one of the storage sheds. Baku's distraction. Right on schedule. Guards ran toward the fire, shouting orders and grabbing buckets. In the chaos, Celeste and Ephraim slipped back through the fence line and into the woods. Baku materialized beside them, his expression unchanged. He gestured for them to follow and led them deeper into the forest. They ran for over an hour, putting distance between themselves and Cromer's plantation. By the time they stopped, the sun had risen fully, burning away the last traces of night. They reached a small stream where water ran clear over smooth stones. Celeste dropped to her knees beside it, plunging her hands into the cold water. She scrubbed at them frantically, even though there was no visible blood. Ephraim sat nearby, giving her space. Baku stood watch at the edge of the clearing, alert for any signs of pursuit. Finally, Celeste's movements slowed. She pulled her hands from the water and stared at them. They were still trembling. "One down," she whispered. Her voice was hollow, empty. 22 to go. Early the next morning, Ephraim woke to the sound of water running over stones. His back ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and his shoulders were stiff from the tension of yesterday's escape. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. The stream looked peaceful in the dawn light. Mist hung low over the water, catching the first rays of sun. Birds called from the trees overhead. Celeste knelt at the water's edge about 20 yards away, her hands moving through tall grass. She was gathering herbs. He could see the small pile beside her. Wild mint, maybe? Or something medicinal. Her movements were careful and deliberate, as if the simple task helped her focus. Baku sat against a tree nearby, already awake, his eyes scanning the forest. He nodded once when he saw Ephraim stir. Ephraim stood and walked to the stream, kneeling to splash cold water on his face. The shock of it helped clear his mind. When he looked up, Celeste was watching him. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some." Her voice was quiet, measured, back to the careful control she usually maintained. He wanted to ask if she was all right, but he already knew the answer. Instead, he said, "We should move soon. They'll be searching. I know." She returned to her herbs, plucking a few more stems before gathering them into a small cloth bundle. They ate a quick breakfast of dried meat and stale bread that Baku had carried in his pack, then broke camp. By mid-morning, they were moving through the woods again. Baku led the way, reading signs in the forest that Ephraim couldn't see. Bent grass, disturbed soil, broken branches. They walked in silence for over an hour before Celeste finally spoke. "The ledger has 23 names left," she said. "I've been thinking about which one to target next." Ephraim glanced at her. "How do you choose?" "The worst ones first, the ones who enjoyed it most." Her expression remained neutral, but her hands tightened around the straps of her small pack. "Cromer was bad, but there are others who were worse." "Worse how?" She was quiet for a long moment. They walked through a patch of sunlight that broke through the canopy, then back into shadow. "There was a man named Whitmore," she said finally. "He owned a plantation near Baton Rouge. He purchased women specifically to break them. That was his hobby, his interest." Ephraim felt his stomach tighten. "I was sent to him when I was 16. I'd tried to protect another girl. Her name was Sarah. She was only 14, and she was terrified. One of the trainers was hurting her, and I stepped between them." Celeste's voice remained steady, almost clinical. "That was against the rules. We weren't supposed to protect each other. We were supposed to accept our role." "What happened?" "They sold me to Whitmore as punishment. He specialized in correction, in teaching disobedient women their place." She paused, stepping over a fallen log. "I was there for 6 months. He had methods, techniques designed to destroy the part of you that resists, the part that fights back." Ephraim didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. "Sarah died 2 weeks after I left," Celeste continued. "I heard about it later. She hung herself in the quarters. She was 15 years old. I'm sorry. Whitmore is still alive, still buying women, still breaking them." Her jaw tightened slightly. "He's on the list." They walked in heavy silence. Ephraim thought about the weight Celeste carried. Not just her own trauma, but the memory of every woman the system had destroyed. No wonder she moved through the world like a ghost. No wonder she killed with such precision. By mid-afternoon, they stopped beside another stream to refill their water skins. The forest here was thicker, darker. Less sunlight penetrated the canopy. Baku knelt beside the water, cupping his hands to drink. Ephraim did the same. Celeste stood slightly apart, scanning the trees. Then Baku went still. His head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. His eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Ephraim asked quietly. Baku stood slowly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. He opened his mouth to... The first man stepped out from behind a thick oak tree, rifle raised. Then another. Then 4 more, surrounding them completely. 6 armed men. All white. All wearing the kind of clothes that marked them as plantation security. Hired muscle for wealthy masters. "Don't move," the nearest one said. He was a big man with a scarred face and cold eyes. "Hands where we can see them." Ephraim's heart dropped into his stomach. They'd been anticipated. The syndicate had known Celeste would target Cromer. They'd been waiting. Baku moved first, lunging toward the nearest gunman with his knife drawn. He was fast, faster than the men expected, but not fast enough. One of them swung his rifle like a club, catching Baku across the temple with the wooden stock. The sound was sickening. Baku dropped immediately, unconscious before he hit the ground. "No!" Ephraim shouted. He started toward Baku, but 3 men grabbed him. He fought back, throwing wild punches, but they were bigger and better armed. One of them drove a fist into his stomach, doubling him over. Another struck him across the face, splitting his lip. Celeste stood frozen. Her eyes were wide, her breathing rapid. Ephraim could see the terror in her expression, not terror of the men, but terror of something internal. Her body wouldn't move. Trauma had locked her in place. "Celeste, run!" Ephraim shouted. She didn't respond, couldn't respond. The men dragged Ephraim to the ground. He felt cold iron shackles close around his wrists, then his ankles. They chained him like an animal. "Found the marshal," one of them said with satisfaction. "The freedman helping the killer. Boss'll pay extra for him." They hauled Ephraim upright. He struggled against the chains, but it was useless. One of the men hit him again, this time with the rifle butt across his shoulders. Pain exploded down his spine. Through blurred vision, he saw Celeste finally move. She took 1 step forward, reaching toward him, then froze again. Her hands trembled violently. "Run!" Ephraim tried to say, but his mouth was full of blood. 2 of the men started toward her. She stumbled backward, then turned and ran. They chased her to the stream's edge, but she dove into the water without hesitation, disappearing beneath the surface. The men waited, rifles ready, but she didn't resurface, not where they expected. Ephraim realized she must have swum underwater, using the current to carry her downstream and away. "Let her go," the scarred man said. "We got what we came for. The marshal's worth more anyway. They want to make an example of him." They dragged Ephraim into the woods, away from the stream. He tried to look back, tried to see if Celeste had escaped, but one of the men jerked his chains hard enough to make him stumble. Baku still lay motionless on the ground. They left him there. Celeste emerged from the water 1/2 mile downstream, gasping for air. Her lungs burned, her whole body shook uncontrollably. She crawled onto the muddy bank and collapsed, coughing up water. For several minutes, she couldn't do anything except breathe and shake and try not to vomit. Then the full weight of what happened crashed down on her. She'd frozen. When Ephraim needed her most, her body had refused to move. All the carefully built courage, all the calculated revenge, it had disappeared the moment real danger appeared. The old training, the old fear, had taken control. And because of that, Ephraim was gone. She pushed herself to her knees, her hands sinking into the mud. Something caught her eye. A scrap of dark fabric caught on a branch near the water's edge. She reached for it with trembling fingers. It was a piece of Ephraim's coat, torn away during the struggle. The fabric was stained dark with blood. Celeste clutched it to her chest. Her breathing became ragged, uneven. "I left him," she whispered. "I left him." The words came again, louder. "I left him." She'd promised herself she would never be powerless again, never freeze again, never let fear control her. But when it mattered most, she'd failed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The temperature dropped. Night was falling. Celeste knelt alone on the muddy bank, holding the blood-stained fabric, and finally let herself sob. Celeste didn't know how long she knelt there. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. The forest around her grew darker, colder. Still she remained frozen on the muddy bank, clutching Ephraim's torn coat to her chest. Her sobs eventually quieted into shallow, shuddering breaths. The initial wave of grief gave way to something else, a hollow, aching emptiness that felt worse than the pain. She'd failed. After everything she'd survived, everything she'd overcome, she'd failed the one person who'd treated her like a human being. But sitting in the mud wouldn't help him. The thought came slowly, cutting through the fog of despair. Ephraim was still alive. The men had taken him somewhere, which meant there was still time. Celeste forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled beneath her, weak from exhaustion and shock. Her clothes were soaked through, heavy with river water and mud. The evening air bit at her exposed skin. She needed to move, needed to think clearly. She stumbled back upstream, following the path she'd taken to escape. Her movements were mechanical at first, one foot in front of the other, but gradually her training reasserted itself. Years of forced discipline kicked in, steadying her breathing, sharpening her focus. By the time she reached their campsite, full darkness had fallen. She found Baku exactly where they'd left him, lying motionless on the ground near the stream. For one terrible moment, she thought he was dead. Then she saw his chest rise and fall. Celeste dropped to her knees beside him. His face was badly bruised. Blood dried along his temple where the rifle had struck him. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck, feeling for his pulse. It was strong, steady. "Baku," she said quietly. Then louder, "Baku." He didn't respond. She needed water. She crawled to the stream, cupped her hands, and brought water back to him. Gently, she trickled it across his lips, then dampened the edge of her sleeve and cleaned the blood from his face. After several minutes, Baku groaned. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Don't move too quickly," Celeste said. "You were hit hard." Baku blinked several times, then tried to sit up. He winced, pressing one hand to his head. "What happened?" "They ambushed us. 6 men. They took Ephraim." The words came out flat, emotionless. Celeste couldn't afford emotion right now. She needed information, needed a plan. Baku's expression darkened as the memory returned. He cursed under his breath in a language Celeste didn't recognize, then switched back to English. "Where did they take him?" "I don't know. She stopped, swallowing hard. "I froze. When they came for him, I couldn't move. By the time I could think again, it was too late." Baku looked at her for a long moment. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. Trauma does that. Makes the body remember things the mind wants to forget. "I left him there." "You're here now." Baku pushed himself fully upright, still holding his head. "That's what matters. Where captured freedmen are taken. Do you want to know?" "Yes. There's a central compound, about 10 miles northeast of here. The syndicate uses it as their main operation. That's where they bring people they want to make examples of." His jaw tightened. "That's where they'll take him." Celeste felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, exactly, but purpose. Direction. "Can you get me there?" "I can show you the way." "But Celeste," Baku's expression was grave, "that compound is heavily guarded. They have dozens of armed men. Walls. Locked gates. Even if you get inside, getting out alive is—" "I'm not asking if it's safe," Celeste interrupted. "I'm asking if you can show me where it is." Baku studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him nod, slowly. "I can show you. Then we leave soon. I need to prepare first." Celeste spent the entire night working with quiet, methodical precision. First, she gathered herbs from the areas surrounding their camp. She knew which plants to look for, had learned them during her years in the breeding houses. The women there had taught each other in whispers, passing down knowledge that might save their lives or end their suffering. Foxglove for the heart, nightshade for the mind, hemlock for quick death. She crushed the herbs between stones, mixing them with water to create poisons of varying strength. Some would kill quickly. Others would incapacitate. She stored each mixture in small vials she fashioned from hollow reeds, sealing them with wax from the remains of their candle. Next, she sharpened her blade. The knife had been a gift from the Maroons, small, balanced, deadly. She worked the whetstone across its edge with long, practiced strokes, the repetitive motion calming her racing thoughts. As she worked, she made herself remember. Not to torture herself, but to harden her resolve. She remembered the first time she'd been displayed at auction. Remembered the hands that grabbed at her, the voices that discussed her body like she was livestock. Remembered the breeding houses with their locked doors and barred windows. Remembered giving birth alone in a cold room, only to have her child taken before she could even hold it. She remembered every moment of powerlessness, every time she'd been forced to submit, every time her body had been used as a tool for someone else's profit or pleasure. And she remembered the 7 men she'd killed, how their deaths had felt like taking pieces of herself back, how each one had been a small act of reclamation. But now it was different. She wasn't killing for vengeance anymore. She was killing to save someone who'd treated her with dignity, someone who'd seen her as a person, not a weapon or a victim. This was responsibility. This was choice. This was courage being reborn from the ashes of her fear. Baku watched her work in silence. He didn't offer advice or ask questions. He simply tended his own wounds and prepared his own weapons. A longer knife, a hatchet, rope for climbing. As the night deepened, Celeste felt the transformation settling into her bones. The grief was still there, but it no longer controlled her. The fear remained, but she was no longer paralyzed by it. She'd frozen once. She wouldn't freeze again. Just before dawn, they set out. Baku led the way through the dark forest, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every trail. Celeste followed close behind, her weapons concealed beneath her clothes, her mind focused and clear. The sky began to lighten gradually, deep black fading to navy, then gray. Birds started their morning songs. The air grew warmer. They reached a ridge overlooking a cleared area just as the first golden rays of sunlight touched the treetops. Below them, surrounded by open ground and high wooden walls, sat the compound. It was larger than Celeste had imagined. Multiple buildings inside the walls, guard towers at each corner. Men moving along the perimeter with rifles. She stood at the ridge's edge, looking down at the place where Ephraim was being held, where the syndicate centered its operation, where so many women had been broken and sold. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. Baku moved beside her, waiting. Celeste exhaled slowly, feeling the morning air fill her lungs. She felt no fear now, only clarity, only purpose. "I am ending this today," she said. They moved down from the ridge as the sun climbed higher, using the dense forest for cover until they reached the cleared ground surrounding the compound. Celeste and Baku crouched in thick brush at the edge of the tree line, watching guards move along the walls. The compound was a fortress, wooden walls 12 feet high, reinforced with iron brackets. 4 guard towers, one at each corner, each manned by 2 armed men. A main gate at the front, heavily barred. The grounds inside were visible through gaps in the wood. Several large buildings, stables, what looked like barracks. Celeste counted the guards during their rotation. 6 men walking the perimeter, 4 more in the towers, at least another dozen moving between buildings inside. Too many to fight directly, but she wasn't planning to fight her way in. "The back gate," Baku whispered, pointing. "Smaller, less guarded. Once the fire starts, they'll panic. The women can escape there." Celeste nodded. "How long until you can set the fires?" "Give me 20 minutes to circle around. When you see smoke from the eastern barn, you'll know it started." "That's enough time." Baku gripped her shoulder briefly. "Be careful." Then he was gone, melting into the forest with barely a sound. Celeste waited, watching the guards complete another rotation. Her heart beat steadily. Her hands didn't shake. The morning air was already growing warm, humid. Sweat gathered at her temples. She stood up, stepping out of the brush into the open. The nearest guard spotted her immediately. he shouted, raising his rifle. Two more guards came running. Celeste raised her hands slowly, keeping them visible. She made herself stand still as they surrounded her, barking questions, made her face calm and resigned. "I came to reclaim my place," she said quietly. "I'm tired of running." The guards exchanged glances. One of them, an older man with a scarred face, stepped closer, studying her. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're her, the one they're hunting." "Yes. You expect us to believe you just walked up and surrendered?" Celeste lowered her eyes, letting her shoulders slump, playing the role she'd been forced to play for years. Broken. Defeated. "I have nowhere else to go. The Maroons won't keep me. The law wants me dead. At least here, I know what to expect." The scarred guard laughed, a harsh sound. "You killed 7 of our buyers. You think they'll just take you back?" "I think they'll do whatever profits them most." Celeste met his eyes. "And I'm worth more alive than dead." That gave them pause. She could see them calculating, weighing the bounty against what the syndicate's leaders would pay for her recapture, for the chance to make an example of her. "Search her," the scarred guard ordered. Rough hands patted her down. They found the knife immediately, confiscated it. But they missed the small vials hidden in the lining of her dress, missed the thin wire wrapped around her wrist beneath her sleeve. "She's clean," one guard reported. The scarred guard grabbed her arm. "Come on. The bosses will want to see you." They marched her through the main gate. Celeste kept her eyes down, observing everything through her peripheral vision. The layout of the compound, the locations of the buildings, the number of guards visible. Most importantly, she saw them. Enslaved women moving between buildings, carrying water, tending gardens, their faces carefully blank. Some glanced at her as she passed. One older woman's eyes widened in recognition. The guards brought her to a large building in the compound's center. Inside, the air was cooler, dimmer. They pushed her down a hallway lined with locked doors. She could hear sounds behind some of them. Quiet weeping, hushed voices. The breeding chambers. They stopped outside an office. The scarred guard knocked, then pushed the door open. "Found her walking up to the front gate," he announced. "Says she wants to come back." 2 men sat inside. Both were well-dressed, clean-shaven, wearing the comfortable expressions of people who'd never questioned their power. Celeste recognized their names from the ledger. Caldwell and Morrison, senior members of the syndicate. Caldwell stood, circling around his desk to look at her. "Well, well, the infamous Celeste. We've been searching for you." "I know. And you just decided to return? How convenient." "I decided I was tired of being hunted." Morrison laughed. "More likely you realized you had no options left." He nodded to the guards. "Lock her in the holding cells. We'll decide what to do with her later." "I need water first," Celeste said quickly. "Please, I've been walking all night." Caldwell waved dismissively. "Give her water. Then lock her up." The guards dragged her back down the hallway to a small room with a water barrel and tin cups. One guard dipped a cup and handed it to her. She drank slowly, watching them over the rim. "Could I bring some to the others?" she asked, gesturing to the locked doors. "There are women in those rooms who must be thirsty." The guards exchanged glances. "That's not our problem." "Please," Celeste made her voice soft, pleading. "Just one kindness before you lock me away." The scarred guard sighed. "Fine. Fill 2 cups. Make it quick." Celeste filled 2 cups with water. As she lifted them, she palmed one of the vials from her dress lining, crushing it quickly and letting the liquid poison drip into both cups. The mixture was colorless, odorless, fast-acting. She carried the cups down the hall, offering one to each guard with trembling hands. "Thank you for the kindness." They drank without suspicion. Celeste counted silently. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. Both guards collapsed, their bodies seizing briefly before going still. The poison worked faster than she'd expected. She grabbed the keys from the scarred guard's belt and began unlocking doors. The first room held 3 women, all young, all terrified. They stared at her in shock. "I'm Celeste," she said quickly. "I'm getting you out. Stay quiet and follow my instructions exactly." She moved down the hallway, unlocking every door. Some rooms held multiple women. Others held only one. All of them looked at her with the same mixture of hope and disbelief. When all the doors were open, Celeste gathered them in the hallway. 15 women total, ranging from barely old enough to walk to gray-haired elders. "There's a back gate on the eastern side," she told them. "Soon there will be fires. When you see smoke, run for that gate. Don't look back. There are Maroons in the forest who will help you." "What about you?" one woman asked. "I'm finishing this." Outside, smoke began to rise. The settlement sat deep in the swamp, where cypress trees grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. Wooden platforms connected dwellings built high on stilts above the water. Smoke from cooking fires drifted through the canopy. Children's voices echoed across the water as they helped gather cattail roots. Celeste sat on the porch of one dwelling, her legs dangling over the edge. She held Ephraim's torn shirt in her lap, threading a bone needle through the fabric with careful precision. The movements were meditative, repetitive. She'd spent 2 days doing small tasks like this, mending clothes, grinding herbs, helping prepare meals, anything to keep her hands busy, anything to quiet her mind. Inside the dwelling, Ephraim slept on a woven mat. His breathing was steady now, deeper than it had been when they first arrived. The worst of his injuries were healing. Broken ribs wrapped tight with cloth. Deep bruises fading from purple to yellow-green. The cuts on his face scabbed over cleanly. He'd been unconscious the first night, barely responsive the second day. Only this morning had he finally sat up and eaten solid food. Celeste finished a stitch and tested the seam. Strong enough. She continued working, listening to the sounds of the settlement. Women talking in low voices near the cooking fires, someone sharpening a blade against stone, water lapping against the platform supports, peaceful sounds, safe sounds. A shadow fell across her work. Celeste looked up to find one of the maroon women standing nearby, an older woman named Abini, with gray streaked through her hair. "The injured ones are asking for you," Abini said. Celeste set the shirt aside and stood. "Are they worse?" "No. They just want to see you." Abini's expression was unreadable. "They feel safer when you're near." Celeste followed her across swinging rope bridges to another dwelling, where the women rescued from the compound were being housed. Most were still recovering physically. All were recovering emotionally. Some had been in that place for months, others for years. Inside, 15 pairs of eyes turned toward Celeste as she entered. She moved among them quietly, checking bandages, offering water, listening when they needed to talk. One young woman, maybe 16, gripped Celeste's hand tightly. "Is it true what they're saying?" the girl whispered. "That you killed all 7 of them?" "Yes." "And you burned the whole compound?" "Yes." The girl's grip tightened. "Good. I'm glad they're dead." Celeste didn't know how to respond to that. She simply squeezed the girl's hand back. Another woman spoke up from across the room. "People are talking about you, in the markets, at the mills, everywhere." She paused. "They say you're a spirit of vengeance, that you can move like smoke and kill without being seen." "I'm not a spirit," Celeste said quietly. "I'm just a woman who got tired of running." "You're more than that," the woman insisted. "You're what they fear." "What they should have always feared." Celeste finished her rounds and returned to her own dwelling as afternoon stretched toward evening. Ephraim was awake now, sitting up with his back against the wall. He looked tired, but alert. "How are the others?" he asked. "Healing." Celeste sat down beside him, picking up his shirt again. "Some faster than others." "And you?" She threaded the needle through another tear. "I'm fine." "Celeste!" She stopped sewing, met his eyes. I'm alive. That's more than I expected. Ephraim was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Thank you for coming back for me. You would have done the same. That doesn't make it less significant. He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. I thought I was dead. When they dragged me into that cellar and started beating me, I was certain that was the end. Celeste resumed her stitching. I couldn't leave you there. Not after you saw me as something other than a weapon. What do you mean? She pulled the thread taut, knotting it carefully. Everyone who looked at me saw what they wanted to see. The masters saw property. The syndicate saw profit. Even some of the enslaved people saw a curse or a myth. She glanced at him. You saw a person. Someone making choices in impossible circumstances. Because that's what you are. Maybe. Celeste bit off the excess thread. Or maybe I'm becoming that now. With room to choose. Footsteps on the platform outside announced Baku's arrival. He ducked through the doorway carrying 2 bowls of stew. Thought you might be hungry. They ate in comfortable silence. The stew was thick with okra and fish, seasoned with herbs that grew wild in the swamp. Real food prepared with care. Not rations, not scraps. Baku finished first and set his bowl aside. Word's spreading fast. Faster than I expected. He looked at Celeste. Plantation owners 3 counties over are nervous. They're doubling their patrols, checking on their breeding operation. Good, Celeste said. They should be nervous. Some are offering rewards for information about you. Big rewards. Enough to tempt even freed people. Ephraim leaned forward. Then we need to move deeper into Maroon territory, where bounty hunters won't risk following. There are settlements further south, Baku confirmed. Deeper in the swamp. Harder to reach, but completely hidden from white patrols. I can guide you there when you're ready to travel. How soon? Celeste asked. A few more days. Give Ephraim time to heal properly. That evening, as sunset turned the water golden orange, Celeste walked to the edge of the settlement. She stood on a ridge overlooking the swamp, watching egrets circle above the trees. The air smelled of wet earth and growing things. She heard footsteps behind her. Ephraim approached slowly, favoring his injured ribs but walking on his own strength. You shouldn't be up, Celeste said. I needed to move. He stood beside her, looking out over the water. It's beautiful here. It's safe here. For now. Celeste pulled something from her pocket. Jonas Sutter's onyx ring, the one she'd taken from the first master she killed. She'd kept it all this time, a reminder of where she'd started, of what she'd survived. Now she held it up to the fading light. The black stone caught the sunset, gleaming like dark water. What will you do with that? Ephraim asked. Keep it, Celeste said. Not as a trophy, as proof that I took back control of my own story. She slipped it onto her finger. The weight felt right. Behind them, voices drifted across the water. Stories being told around cooking fires. Celeste caught fragments. Tales of a beautiful woman who destroyed an entire trafficking ring, who freed dozens, who moved like a ghost and struck like lightning. The myth was already growing, changing, becoming something larger than the truth. Ephraim offered his arm. Ready? Celeste took it. Together they walked back toward the settlement as darkness gathered around them. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the cypress canopy, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called. Somewhere even further, her legend continued to spread, part warning, part inspiration, part ghost story whispered in the dark. But here, in this moment, Celeste was simply herself, a woman who had survived the unsurvivable, who had reclaimed her humanity one choice at a time. The ring on her finger caught the final light as they disappeared into the dense forest, leaving only whispers behind them. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.